This is a 3D printed RC side dump trailer that can dump off to either the left or right side thanks to this remotely controlled locker bar, all while still being in full control of the semi, meaning you can increase the angle of the dump while driving to achieve a nice even spread of beans. Once done with your material transport needs, you can unhitch, pull away, and re-hitch to any of the other trailers, such as this drop deck trailer for hauling heavy equipment, or this cargo trailer for delivering a nice cold bubbly water to your best pal. And all of this happens hands-free thanks to this magnetic hitching system, which sends power and information from the RC semi to the trailer. To figure out the dimensions of the side dump frame and how everything will eventually hook in, I took the old drop deck trailer design and deleted the deck/ramp pieces. From there, I created a 2D cross section of the side dump tub and extruded it out about 400 millimeters to form the shape. It took a lot of iterations to get a tub shape that both looked realistic and lent itself well to my design requirements. The main requirement stemming from the fact that this threaded N20 motor is 84 millimeters in length. This creates a pain point as the lowest I can mount the N20 motor is at deck height. Trying to place it lower than this on the front half results in it potentially coming in contact with the fifth wheel on the semi. I'd preferably like to mask the entire threaded rod inside the side dump, but if you look at photos of real life side dumps, you'll see that they're actually somewhat proportionally smaller when compared to the truck. Hence the struggle of coming up with a side dump shape that hides as much of the threaded push rod as possible, but also looks appropriate behind the truck. I did eventually come up with something that both looked good and only resulted in a small portion of the push rod sticking up above the tub, which I can live with. Moving on to tub length, I want to keep the same adjustability aspect of the drop deck trailer, which is being able to string together an infinite number of middle sections to create your desired length of trailer, whether it's a short and stubby one section trailer or an 8-foot monstrosity. So after revamping the frame to be a little bit thicker and removing the drop from the front frame, I started splitting the tub apart. Now I did end up having to create two separate middle sections, meaning the shortest trailer possible is 4 sections total. One is just a blank slate and should be used to create your length, but the second one has catch pins, which my plan is to place a servo in a middle frame section that can push and pull a bar that will catch either the left or right pin, preventing that side from moving and causing it to tip that way when the push rods are engaged. To transfer the motion from the servo to the sliding bar mechanism, I'm going to be trying out a new design that should make everything super simple and eliminate a couple screws. The design being this circular cylinder with another smaller extruded cylinder on top. The servo will spin this back and forth, and the smaller cylinder will mesh with the locker bar, causing it to follow suit. I really like this design as it seems pretty robust and cuts down on the number of screws/moving parts required. I can't take full credit for thinking of it though, as I actually got the idea from MJet Development, who uses it to move a nozzle on an RC jet boat back and forth. To keep DOT happy and make sure my gross vehicle weight rating or GVWR is sufficient, I added a third axle onto the back, which is both functional as it helps stabilize the trailer and add some more weight down low, but more importantly, 3 axles just looks really cool. As you might imagine, I went through multiple iterations on this side dump, trying to create something that has a good range of motion and enough power to dump out a considerable amount of weight. One thing to note is that I ended up having to alter the code on the semi-truck just a little because I had some delay issues causing the N20 motors on the trailer to do some funky things. Luckily, when I did figure out what the heck was going on, I only had to change a couple lines of code. So for those of you who built the truck and uploaded the code before the 20th of April, I would highly recommend re-downloading the code off of GitHub and uploading it to your truck once more before starting on this trailer. Anybody who built the truck after that shouldn't have a problem hooking up to any of the trailers. The PCB and code used in this side dump and cargo trailer are the same as what's used on the drop deck trailer. My hope being to make your life as the builder a little more straightforward. The trailer legs on the side dump are also set up similar to the drop deck, in which these little legs can be adjusted for optimal trailer height to make backing up and hitching flawless. Though speaking of hitching, what isn't flawless is this push rod connected to the magnetic hitch pin. I kind of shot myself in the foot when I first created it because when the magnet is disengaged, the push rod sits up super high, creating an issue when you're trying to back up to a trailer with low hanging parts on the front. This wasn't an issue on the drop deck because the deck sat above the frame, but on this side dump, I've got debris deflectors hanging over either side, and these were running into said push rod. This was another thing fixed with a couple code tweaks, so one more reason to make sure you update the ESP32 on your truck to the latest code version. Nevertheless, let's talk about stylistic accenting. The first being mud flaps. Now, I just want to say I completely missed the opportunity on the drop deck trailer, as what you're about to see may just be the coolest thing you've ever witnessed with your own two eyes. That is logos on mud flaps. Now, with most commercial mud flaps, on semis in particular, have somebody's logo printed on it, and I think it can add a cool look to the whole setup. So I of course took one of my own logos, which is themed around an excavator digging up some dirt, and extruded it out onto my mud flaps. I then printed it with generic black TPU, programmed in a filament swap, and printed the logo itself in white. The result? Well, the result is sick. Then, just in case you aren't sure what kind of trailer this is, I decided to add a hint on the side of the dump to help. Now that I've got the first full iteration complete, I decided to forge ahead with a second one, except this time matching the color scheme of my own custom RC semi, the mean, lean red machine, which I actually have a really cool experiment planned for, and while I wait for everything to print on the new side dump, it seems like the perfect time to carry it out. The material I use for all the tires and tracks on these models is TPU, which is a super great material to work with as it prints easily on most printers, has a nice amount of squish for soaking up bumps, and feels practically indestructible. Seriously, this is the preferred material in ant weight battle bots because it can take a hit and just keep on going. But with all those great attributes, there is one drawback: grip on smooth or hard surfaces. Traditional tires or Lego vehicle tires are made of a silicone type material, which allow it to gain traction on the smoothest surfaces and sometimes even achieves a sticky feel. As of now though, there's pretty much no way to 3D print silicone material on a traditional FDM printer. The closest would probably be this Ninja Flex, but even then, based off of reviews, it's only a little bit better for grip than this 95A material I'm using. Your best bet would be using the 3D printer to create a mold of the tire you want and then just manually pour in the silicone to create the part. The game only really changes if we also include the capabilities of resin printers. About 6 months ago, I started looking into this, and is when I discovered this Silicone 40A resin by Formlabs, which, based on everything I've seen, results in a true silicone part. But that's about where my research ended, as Formlab products are a little above my pay grade. Though recently, Formlabs saw my RC Semi and asked if I'd be interested in using one of their printers. Well, there's only really one answer to that: yes. Yes, please. After all, I am a 3D printing nerd, and I want to see how far the rabbit hole goes. And well, Formlabs absolutely hooked it up. I'm talking printer, wash station, cure station, tools for post-processing, multiple resin vats, the list goes on and on. Now, I've avoided resin printers in the past, primarily because my main focus is building stuff that all of you can also build at home on FDM printers, which that's not going to change. But I do think it's super cool to see where the top of the line printing can get you, with the hope being that 3 to 4 years down the road, this becomes more and more accessible to everyone, just like what we saw with the FDM printers over the last 5 years. They started really expensive or very DIY, and now look at them today. Affordable, reliable, and they make astoundingly detailed prints. But anyway, I'll hop off my high horse for now. Another reason I've avoided resin printers in the past is the processing and cleanup that's required, which usually results in resin getting everywhere, noxious fumes, etc. With the Formlabs though, even after just opening up a couple boxes, I can see that an astronomical amount of engineering time went into designing this workflow. Which, this seems like a good time to add that Formlabs isn't paying me to say any of this. They did send me the machine, thank you, but my thoughts on it are entirely my own and are subject to the printer's results. Before actually printing anything, I did take the time to build out a full ventilation system for both the Form 4 printer and my FDM printers as well, just to be safe. I used 3-inch ducting on everything and 3D printed the connection points. I already had a pretty powerful exhaust fan in place, so I just made sure I had good negative suction by laying down some fog near any gaps in the printer and verifying it was actually getting pulled into the machine. Then I built out an air/UV tight space for my resin vats and miscellaneous storage, where I also won't mind if stuff gets spilled a little. I probably went a little overboard with all of this because after starting my first print, it quickly became apparent that the workflow is super super streamlined and clean. Just for example, I printed some mini figurines on this flex platform, which I was able to remove and directly transfer over to the wash station. I mean, just look at this tray come up. I consistently get oohs and ahs from anyone that sees this. Then from the wash station, you can pop it over into the curing station and select a preset based on the resin used. All of this happened without a single drop of resin getting on me or my workstation. So yes, I'll applaud you, Formlabs. I'm thoroughly impressed. Now these first couple test prints were done in clear V5, which is crazy see-through, and I do have some fun plans for this in the future. But back on topic, which is the silicone resin. I popped in a fresh vat, opened up a bottle of Silicone 40A, and slid on a build platform. Now this is definitely where things got more complicated, as there's not many examples of people using this stuff across the internet, so it's a little like the Wild West. Luckily, the documentation on how to use it is pretty good from Formlabs. So before I started printing anything, I had to redesign my tires to be silicone friendly, which mainly included removing any overhangs and also building the supports directly into the model rather than using the slicer supports. Such as this front tire that has a required overhang so that the truck's steering knuckle has room to exist. In order to keep the overhang, I created a bunch of these little tabs to help hold it together. Another change was adding a hole where the tire contacts the build plate to keep it from suction cupping the vat. With those changes made, I sent the tire to the printer and well, it went off without a hitch. I will say this resin looks like Venom come to life or some kind of death sludge. Taking the build platform off, things got messy fast. Whoa. And I don't really think there's a great way to get around it. Removing the tire from the build platform, I dropped it into a Tupperware and filled it with enough IPA to cover the tire. From there, I just placed it into a sonification bath or ultrasonic cleaner filled with water. Unlike most resins, IPA isn't enough to remove any residual material with the silicone resin. It needs a little more help either by using a mixture of IPA and N-butyl acetate, which I opted against as it results in some funky smells. Option B is the method you see here with the sonification bath, which, as I understand it, it works by emitting high frequency sounds, which causes the water inside to form little air bubbles that then collapse in on themselves, helping to dislodge any extra material on the part being washed. That said, this thing sounds awful when you turn it on. Once finished, I pulled the tire out, transferred it to some water, and threw it in the cure station for 10 minutes. The final result is an insanely malleable tire that is super tacky to the touch. Doing a squish test between the TPU and silicone, you can clearly see the difference, and then a table smack test also lends some insight to its characteristics. Using the one finger slide method, I was easily able to get the TPU tire to slide, but the silicone one not so much, unless I practically pulled it up off the table and carried it across. I repeated this whole process again and again until I had a nice collection of tires. One complete semi-set and one forklift set. In order to really see the improvements, I'm going to be doing a ramp test to see how much more of an incline the silicone tires can climb. The brown truck will be the control using the standard TPU tires, then my own personal rig will get the fancy pants silicone tires. One downside of the silicone is that they're way harder to keep on the wheels as they just have so much flex they can come right off. I tried hot gluing them on, but silicone is a very non-porous material, so that didn't work at all. I ended up getting them on best I could and proceeding with the ramp test anyway, which is just a sheet of plywood taped down on one end with a car jack placed under it to achieve different angles. Angle 1, I did about a 20-degree incline and started with the TPU tires, which did just fine with a little bit of slipping. The silicone tires had no problem. Upping the angle to 25 degrees was just enough to knock out the TPU tires that didn't have enough grip to climb up the ramp. The silicone tires again had no problem. Same for 30 degrees, 35 degrees, 40 degrees did end up proving to be close to the max, partially because the tires kept coming off under load, but if I worked the steering tires back and forth while giving it gas, I could still get it to climb. Repeating the same test with the forklift, I was able to get 11 degrees on the TPU tires and about 20 degrees on the silicone. Addressing the tires coming off, I did get them to stay on by using some special rubber superglue and letting it sit for 24 hours. Then I had no problem mobbing around. Overall, this was a super satisfying experiment that yielded some significant gains in performance. If you really have your heart set on silicone tires, I'd recommend the mold method. Unless you're a commercial shop that could benefit from easily being able to make small engine gaskets or shock covers, then this could potentially be a game changer for you. But for me personally, TPU tires work just fine and are what I'll continue to use on all my models. I'll just break out my silicone tires when I feel like showing off. Furthermore, that experiment actually took closer to a week than a couple of hours, so the new side dump parts have been done for a while. Assembly was much smoother this time and everything worked really well out of the gate. I also opted to change the side dump label to boot dump, as side dump just seemed a little too much on the nose. One last issue I did run into was the screw placement inside the side dump. I have them placed low so that a lot of weight can be loaded and I don't have to worry about the bottom coming apart. The problem with this is that when the tub's pulled down and I really lock it in with the push rods, it actually ends up doing a banana and coming back up. This is an easy fix though, as I have these square extrusions on each piece that are meant to take a small dab of hot glue, which helps keep everything locked together. In addition to the side dump trailer, I've also deemed it appropriate to begin the makings of a cargo trailer because, well, I'm tired of my mini skiddies and bubbly water hauls getting bombarded by bean storms and coffee spills throughout the office. I also think an enclosed cargo trailer can make for the ultimate present delivery system. Starting in on the trailer, I did the only thing you can do when making something like this. I made a box. A really long box. Now I'll be the first to admit that this trailer was actually a little trickier to make than you'd think, as you have to print it in sections, and aligning those sections to look like they fit together perfectly, well, that's a trick. I based the dimensions of the trailer off a skid steer. I want to be able to comfortably drive the skid steer into the back of the cargo trailer, pick something up, and then back out. I did toss around the idea of making it fit a stock forklift, but ultimately if I'd done that, it would have ended up being super tall. Instead, I'm going to make a short, stubby mast variation of the forklift as an alternative that will be specific for unloading pallets out of this cargo trailer. Ultimately, the internal dimensions ended up being 110 millimeters wide and 135 millimeters tall. The frame is almost identical to the drop deck trailer, the exception being the leaf springs are now further forward and the axles spaced a little closer together. A slightly changed location for the servo that's now responsible for opening and closing the rear cargo doors, as well as some miscellaneous other tweaks. I went back and forth on whether to place the mechanism for the door below the deck and inside the frame, or have it inside the trailer with a push rod running along the top. There's downsides to both options. By placing the servo in the frame and underneath everything, you have to worry about the mechanism for opening the door getting in the way of backing up to a landing. By placing the servo on the front wall of the trailer and running a push rod along the top to the doors, it significantly reduces the height available for a forklift mast to make it in. Plus, I just don't think it looks the best. Ultimately, I went for the servo in frame option and just tried to place the connection point between the servo and door as close to the door's axis of rotation as possible to make backing up to a landing achievable. Rather than having the screws hold the door in place, I designed them to have circular extrusions on either side that will first slot into the rear cargo box, then when the cargo box is secured to the rear frame, the other end of the door will slot down into these circular cutouts on the rear bumper. In order to add some depth and detail to the trailer, I created trim pieces that, well, pains me to say, have to be glued on, but more on that in a second. I won't go into detail on the frame coming together for this trailer. As mentioned before, it's super similar to the drop deck trailer, though I will point out the door opening push rod, which is controlled via circle and square on a PS4 controller. 3D printing the cargo boxes went somewhat smoothly, except for the fact that almost instantly after I went to place the box on, I realized I never added a screw mounting point on the front box, nor did I do a good job placing the mounting points on any of the other sections. This resulted in some struggle as I had to force everything together. Now, unfortunately, because everything was slightly off from not being mounted correctly, the pivot points for the cargo doors were all messed up. That, paired with that I made the rearmost walls so thin that they failed to print properly, resulted in some subpar door opening performance. Though the important thing to note here is that they even move it all on a version 1 print. That's a win. Gluing the trim pieces on with some hot glue actually ended up working great and served a dual purpose. Not only does it keep the trim in place, but because the trim pieces overlap the boxes, you can use this to your advantage to hold the top end of the boxes together in case you end up like me and your front and middle sections start to form the Grand Canyon. To spice up the overall look of this trailer so it's not just a box on wheels, I added this front windbreaker with some hexagon cutouts for style. Plus, it's got that branding on it. V1 worked, but I quickly hustled to fix everything wrong with it, which started by popping off all the trim, reprinting the boxes, adding a second middle section which gave it a more balanced look, then reprinting the doors properly so as to have a fully functional cargo trailer that does indeed comfortably fit a skid steer. Moving around on the floor for a brief second proved its roadworthiness, and then I of course added on the rear taillights, which comes with the standard on mode, blinker mode, and hazard mode setup. But that's a wrap on the actual building process of these trailers. Now let's talk about what they can do, starting with the drop deck. The primary purpose of the drop deck is to haul around other RC vehicles like this excavator, which needs to be transported to the filming room for a couple action shots. To get it there, I made this temporary ramp that runs off the table to the ground, and well, as you can see here, it is super sketchy. The sudden drop makes it hard to get on, and once I finally did, it really made me wish I had actual Jake brakes. On level ground though, it was a cakewalk, and the rest of the journey went off without a hitch. The secondary use case is for when your personal electric vehicle inevitably runs out of battery, you now have the option of transporting it via freight. Keep in mind, top speed is greatly reduced, but to be fair, this thing weighs almost 30 pounds. Nevertheless, that's enough of the drop deck trailer. It's time to move on to something boxier, if I can get unhigh centered off the top of the ramp with some help from the RC excavator. The primary purpose of the cargo trailer is, well, you guessed it, hauling cargo, such as these pallets. Now I've got the mini skiddy equipped with some forks for this operation, and I also created a special loading dock. Once I remembered how to actually use the skid steer, this proved to be super satisfying and actually relatively straightforward. I am excited to make a variation of the forklift that will also fit inside the cargo trailer, but for now, this is still super cool and makes for a very immersive RC experience. Another area the cargo trailer shines in is being a drink delivery system. Opening the doors, reversing, and then slamming on the brakes allows you to perfectly projectile a drink out the back. That's my favorite thing to do anyway. Now let's park this trailer and head back up the ramp again. The side dump trailer is my personal favorite, partly because I always see them going down the road where I live, but for some reason it also just fulfills the gadgety side of me. The primary use case is of course transporting material, which in order to load it, I equipped an excavator with an oversized bucket and started scooping in beans. Now I definitely need something like a front loader to do this efficiently, as it just takes so many excavator sized bucketfuls to load this thing up. I'm talking at least 15 minutes of heavy machinery operation here. So please, if you wouldn't mind clicking the like button down below, it helps a ton with machinery motivation. Once the beans are loaded, you can then dump them however you like, such as here where I've got a nice even spread going. Then just for the heck of it, I also poured in some fog and dumped it over the side of the table. There you go, a couple use cases for the different trailers you can now use with your RC semi. So if you'd like to build and add these two new trailers to your fleet, I've added modules inside the truck workshop labeled side dump and cargo trailer, which are just below the original drop deck trailer module. These contain all the 3D models for printing and also all the steps required to assemble. If you're new and wanting to join this world of 3D printed RC construction equipment, you can by joining the Professor Boots workshop on my website, professorboots.com. Once you're a member, it'll open up all the how-to courses for these builds, such as this RC excavator with detailed instructions on sourcing components, programming the ESP32s, soldering, printing, and of course, assembly. Joining the workshop supports this channel in a huge way, as while I do accept free 3D printers, I have yet to accept a paid sponsorship. So the workshop is what supports these projects. I also add occasional updates on what I'm working on, as well as early access to some builds, like this cargo trailer, which has now been available to workshop members for I think 3 weeks prior to the posting of this video. Now, just like with the RC semi, crane, and excavator, you, the audience, get to choose the next project, except this time I want to niche it down a little. I really love this truck platform as it has the potential for so many cool variations thanks to its 4 spare servo motor outputs. What this means is we could turn it into a crane truck, slide off truck, or even a self-loading log truck without changing any of the existing electronics and just adding on a couple motors. So please let me know down in the comments below what offshoot of the RC Semi you'd like to see, as well as just the next piece of equipment you want to see. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you here soon with a new project to build.